Why did they laugh when she walked in? The girl in the faded camo jacket hadn't said a word, hadn't even looked at them, yet the whole office seemed to turn against her. Carter stood just inside the glass doors of media, the weight of her worn backpack hanging from one shoulder. Her steps were soft, measured, almost cautious, as if she were walking onto unfamiliar terrain. The lobby smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and the faint metallic tang of fresh construction. Nothing about it felt like her world. Her jacket was frayed at the sleeves. The fabric bore stains that no detergent could erase. The sneakers on her feet had been scuffed raw from miles of rough ground. Here, among blazers, perfume, and shoes that gleamed under the track lighting, she looked like a ghost from another life. The receptionist's eyes flicked up. Jenna's sleek ponytail, flawless eyeliner, blazer that screamed high salary, barely concealed her smirk. "Name?" she asked, clipped, like she was checking off a delivery. His voice was steady, soft but firm. "Carter, I'm the new intern." The words didn't land the way she'd hoped. Jenna's lips twitched upward, like she'd just been handed a private joke. She pointed to a chair in the corner without another word. Walked quietly across the lobby, set her bag down, and sat. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't speak. She simply watched. And that unsettled them more than if she tried to explain herself. Across the room, whispers started. One man chuckled under his breath. Did survival camp drop her off by mistake? Another, loud enough for others to hear, smirked. She must think this is an army base. The laughter grew. It wasn't kind, it wasn't light-hearted, it had teeth. Didn't react. Her gaze drifted to the tall windows where November's gray light filtered through. The skyline stretched sharp and indifferent across the horizon. She noted the fire exits, the nearest stairwell, the way shadows fell across the polished floor. Her eyes scanned the room like she was mapping it. To them it looked like silence. To her it was survival. By 9:30, she'd been ushered into a conference room with a mahogany table so polished it reflected the ceiling lights. Employees clustered around it, buzzing like bees, trading phrases she didn't use. Brand alignment, Q4 targets, strategic positioning. Greg, the team leader, barely looked at her. "Carter, temp intern, logistics or whatever." His voice skimmed over her name like it wasn't worth remembering. Stood, her voice even but clear. "I'm here to assist with operations and supply coordination." He waved her off. "Never mind, just have her audit supply inventory." He pointed at a stack of clipboards by the door. And just like that, she was dismissed. She walked out with the clipboard, her sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. Behind her, the laughter stirred again. Someone muttered, "What's with the army surplus vibe?" A ripple of chuckles followed, sharp enough to sting. But she didn't flinch. Her fingers brushed the worn strap of her backpack, and she kept walking. If she felt anything, she buried it deep. Why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she explain who she really was? Because sometimes dignity doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it waits. The storage room was dim, stacked with boxes of paper, office supplies, and coffee pods. Set the clipboard on a crate, rolling her sleeves as though she'd done this task 100 times before. She moved with quiet precision, checking each box, scanning the rows. No sighs, no grumbling, no complaints. But once, as she reached into her backpack, her fingers brushed a small, faded photograph tucked inside. She paused. In the photo, dust, desert gear, soldiers' faces blurred by sun and grit. A different world, one this place would never understand. Her thumb lingered on it for half a breath. Then she tucked it away and went back to counting pens. At 10:15, a shrill alarm split the air. The office groaned. "Not again," someone muttered. It was the third false alarm that week. People clutched their ears, pulling out their phones to complain, already resigned to waiting for maintenance. Set her clipboard down. She walked toward the panel mounted on the wall. "What's she doing?" whispered, smirking, loud enough for Josh to hear. Studied the panel. The cover, the relay, the faint hum of miswired circuits, it was familiar, painfully so. She pulled a ballpoint pen from her pocket, pressed it against the relay, and nudged it into place with a steady hand. The alarm silenced. The room froze. Dozens of eyes stared at her. The tech guy, his vape pen dangling from his lips, stammered, "How do you?" Clicked her pen closed, slipped it back into her pocket. Her voice was calm. "In the military, we had to fix these under fire." Then she picked up her clipboard and returned to the storage room. The silence that followed was heavier than the alarm had been. But silence never lasts long. By noon, sat alone in the peeling back the wax paper of a simple sandwich. Around her, the interns laughed over takeout bags and smoothies. Leaned across the table, her eyeliner sharp enough to cut. "So, what's with the camo, going hunting after work?" Josh snorted, "Yeah, or digging a trench." Sophie chimed in, "Or sniping the deadline we missed last week." The laughter came fast, bouncing off marble counters, feeding off each other. Bowed her head, chewing slowly. She didn't respond. She didn't defend herself. But her fingers tightened around the bread, just slightly, a grip that betrayed what her face did not. The sound of their laughter was louder than the siren, louder than bullets, louder than anything, because it was meant to wound. Still, she stayed quiet. Later, when the office scrambled for a drone pilot, panic running through every corner, someone tossed the problem toward her. "Hey, Camo girl, you know anything about drones?" Sophie's voice dripped with sarcasm, expecting failure. Set down the files she carried. "I can try." The mockery started before she even touched the device. "Who do you think you are, Air Force?" Josh laughed. But within seconds, the drone was airborne. Smooth, steady, precise. Her phone synced effortlessly, guiding it through sharp turns, fluid sweeps, clean angles. The footage was perfect. The room went still. Lisa, the creative director, lowered her glasses, staring at the live feed. Her voice broke the silence. "Where'd you learn that?" His answer was quiet, heavy with a truth nobody in the room was ready to understand. "During an extraction mission." The words hung there. Nobody laughed this time. But nobody asked her to explain either. The mystery was easier to dismiss than to face. Still, one man noticed. Mike, the janitor, paused with his mop when he saw the tattered map slip from his bag days later. He caught a glimpse of its grid lines, its handwritten marks. His eyes narrowed. He'd seen maps like that before, back when he wore a uniform, long before he traded boots for a mop. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, when his gaze flicked to his. It was a soldier's nod, quiet recognition, a secret exchanged without words. And that was when the story began to shift. Because no matter how small she made herself in that office, the truth couldn't stay buried forever. And when it finally rose, it would shake the building to its foundation. What was she hiding? That was the unspoken question hanging over the office after the drone incident. Nobody asked it directly. Nobody dared. But the silence carried a weight, pressing against every conversation. Arrived the next morning before the rest of them. Her sneakers whispered across the hardwood floors as she slipped into her corner seat. The building was still half asleep, humming only with the steady breath of the HVAC system and the glow of idle screens. She set her backpack down, pulled out the clipboard she'd been given, and started cross-referencing delivery schedules with invoices. To her, it wasn't busy work. It was structure, a system. Each line, each checkmark was a thread holding chaos at bay. At 7:30, the design team blew in. Laughter, perfume, the rustle of shopping bags, the hum of a phone camera streaming live. And all polish and manicured confidence, crowded into the office like they owned it. Their eyes landed on. Perfect grinned, sliding her phone toward. A soldier for the bit. Glanced up, her brown eyes calm. What bit? His hand darted to his chair. She yanked the backpack away before could reach it. Let's see what you keep in here. His voice was low, steady, but edged with warning. Careful, that's fragile. The girls ignored her, pulled out a rusted tin, held it up like a prize. Grenades or rations? The live chat on her phone exploded with laughing emojis. Tugged out a folded map, its edges worn, its grid lines hand-marked. She waved it in front of the camera. What is this? Treasure hunting? Zombie apocalypse prep? The audience howled. The girls giggled louder. His hand closed around the strap of her bag. Give it back. Her voice was soft, but it landed like a command. Froze for a second, blinking at her tone. Then the laughter resumed. Only one man didn't laugh. Mike, the janitor, stood a few feet away, mop in hand. He'd been in the Navy long ago, before his knees betrayed him. He knew maps. He knew the language of symbols and hand-drawn coordinates. What held wasn't a joke. It was something else, something heavier. He didn't speak. He just locked eyes with for a brief second, a soldier's nod, a warning disguised as acknowledgement. She took her backpack back quietly, sliding the map into its place. The phone stream ended with a chorus of snickers. The audience never understood. Neither did the girls, but Mike knew enough to keep watching her. Moments later, another set of eyes saw more than he should have. Harold, the finance director, moved past them, his limp dragging across the floor. He stopped dead when he spotted the map in his hand before tucked it away. His weathered face, lined with years of silence, went pale. His voice was low, almost trembling. Where did you get that RF Delta grid? The laughter died instantly, froze, raised an eyebrow. It's just some doodle. But's voice cut her off, calm, certain. I marked every point myself. The air shifted. Harold's hand tightened on his cane. He looked at her not like an intern, not like a stranger, but like someone who had stepped out of a long-buried memory. His eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. Then he turned and walked away, his limp heavier than before. The girls shrugged, muttering about weird old guys, but the moment didn't fade for her. She felt the silence Harold left behind. Heavy, recognizing. By Wednesday, suspicion lingered like smoke. Delivered her logistics report in the weekly meeting. She spoke clearly, outlining timelines, cost projections, contingency plans. She moved like someone who had done this before in harder places with higher stakes. But Greg cut her down mid-sentence. Weak delivery, scattered details, you're not cut out for media. The room snickered. Vanessa muttered to her neighbor, she looks like a farm girl, now she wants strategy. Greg waved her toward the door. Get coffee, black, 2 sugars. She obeyed, no resistance, no words, just silence. Someone snapped a photo as she left, camo jacket, messy hair, backpack swinging behind her. They posted it online with the caption, Rebel Warehouse Guard. The comments came fast. Militia cosplay, lost prepper, wrong floor, sweetheart. Didn't see them. She was already downstairs, exact change in hand, waiting for coffee at the counter. The barista, Sam, slid the cups toward her, watching the calm way she handled herself. He'd seen her every morning, always quiet, always the same plain order. Today he leaned forward, half joking. You don't seem like the corporate type. Looked up, met his eyes. I'm not. He tilted his head. Then what are you? She paused. For a moment, her fingers lingered on the edge of the tray like they remembered a different weight. Then she said softly, just passing through. And she walked away. Back upstairs, the air buzzed with whispers. The photo of her spread through the office, comments multiplying by the minute. They mocked her backpack, her jacket, her silence. But something else was happening too. A hum. A faint, high-pitched tone that bled through the speakers, barely noticeable. Frowned, another glitch. Set the tray down, her head tilted, listening. Her jaw tightened. That's not a glitch, she said. It's an Alpha Bravo call, a distress signal. The room erupted in laughter. Greg rolled his eyes. She thinks she's in an action movie now. Vanessa sneered. What's next? Parachuting off the roof. Didn't argue. She was already moving. Her backpack swung across her shoulder as she sprinted for the stairs. Her sneakers struck the concrete stairwell, each step faster, harder, pulling her upward. Halfway up, she passed Tony, the security guard, gum in his mouth, radio clipped to his vest. He called out, "Slow down. Where's the fire?" His eyes snapped to his, sharp, unflinching. "Trouble on the roof," she said, her tone clipped like an order. Something in him froze. He'd served once briefly before his discharge. He knew that tone, the way soldiers spoke when time mattered. His gums stilled between his teeth. He hesitated, then followed her. Downstairs, the office still laughed, oblivious. Phones buzzed with cruel comments. Fingers tapped keyboards, chasing deadlines. Nobody noticed the shift in air above them. But the rooftop door slammed open. Stepped into the wind just as the sky began to shake. A low, rhythmic thud pulsed in the distance, louder, closer, until the air itself seemed to rip apart. The Black Hawk descended. Its rotors screamed, kicking up dust and loose papers, blasting wind across the rooftop. Downstairs, phones dropped, faces pressed against windows. Someone shouted, "There's a helicopter up there." Greg stormed into the hallway, red-faced. "Who authorized that? This is a civilian building." Stood in the storm of rotor wash, her hair whipping across her face. She didn't flinch. She didn't look back. "Sorry," she said, her voice steady. "They're here for me." And for the first time in that office, silence fell. The Black Hawk hovered, lowering onto the rooftop. A figure in tactical gear stepped out, boots pounding against the concrete. His voice cut through the chaos, deep and commanding. "Lieutenant Carter, mission flag status." The office below erupted. Phones froze mid-recording. Laughter died in throats. On the roof, straightened, her posture snapping into place like a soldier sliding into formation. Her voice carried strong and clear across the storm. "Active." How much truth can a single word carry? One word, that's all it took. "Active." Her voice cut through the storm of rotor blades like a blade itself, sharp and undeniable. For a second, it didn't sound like an intern. It didn't sound like the quiet girl in the corner who fetched coffee and counted pens. It sounded like command. Tony, the security guard, froze in the stairwell. The gum he'd been chewing slipped from his mouth, forgotten. He'd heard that call sign years ago, back in briefing rooms where lives hung in the balance, back when acronyms and grid points meant survival. He stared at her, not sure if he should speak into his radio or salute. The tactical officer on the roof stepped forward, helmet under one arm, headset crackling. "Lieutenant Carter, 7 Alpha, we've been waiting for your signal." And the office below went still. Dozens of faces pressed to the windows. Phones lifted, recording, capturing the surreal sight of a Black Hawk perched on their building. Someone whispered, "No way, that's her. That's the intern." Greg's face flushed red, but his anger was muted by something he didn't understand, fear. Vanessa's smirk faltered, her lips trembling as she whispered, "This isn't real. This can't be real." But it was. Stepped forward, wind tearing at her jacket, hair lashing across her face. She didn't hesitate, didn't glance back. She adjusted her backpack and moved toward the officer like she'd been doing this her whole life. Because she had. Downstairs, chaos ignited. Grabbed Josh's arm. Pull up her name, Google her, do something. Phones flicked, screens lit. And then the headlines started appearing. 7 Alpha returns. Youngest tactical commander breaks silence. Lieutenant Carter surfaces in Manhattan. Footage followed. Old clips from news archives that most people had forgotten or chosen to. A grainy video of a 19-year-old girl, headset on, standing in a trench under gunfire. Her voice calm as chaos raged around her. "Route Charlie, hold formation. Medic left flank. Move." Another clip, her face streaked with dirt, hair tied back, directing a convoy through a sandstorm. Explosions lit up behind her, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She just pointed, precise, commanding. Back in the office, laughter curdled into silence. The Black Hawk's blades roared, rattling glass. Papers flew in the air. On the roof, accepted the headset from the officer. She slid it over her ears like muscle memory. The storm around her seemed to bend, not against her, but with her. Lisa, the creative director, had stopped breathing. She replayed the drone footage had flown days earlier, zooming in on its smooth angles, the steady tracking. "This isn't amateur," she whispered to herself. "This is military precision." Hovered behind her, his vape pen forgotten. "You think she's, what, some kind of operative?" Lisa didn't answer. She was too busy saving the footage to a private folder. Evidence. Proof. A record of the day the intern stopped being invisible. A nervous HR rep with glasses slipping down her nose scrolled through a defense bulletin just published. Her breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered too loud. Sophie turned, irritated. "What now?" Shoved her phone forward. This is her, Carter." The photo on her screen was blurry but unmistakable. In tactical gear, standing in front of a burning vehicle, headset tilted, eyes unflinching. The bulletin praised her as the youngest commander to lead an extraction mission in a red zone. At 19, against all odds. The room went silent. "She's not just some intern," whispered. "She's—" Her voice trailed because no word felt big enough. On the roof, Department of Defense agents stepped from the helicopter, their movements brisk, efficient. A woman with a tight bun and a clipboard approached. Her voice was clipped. "Strategic personnel protection. You're needed." Nodded once. She didn't look at the office windows, didn't wave, didn't smirk. She simply climbed into the chopper. The door slid shut. The Black Hawk lifted, rotors thundering, carrying her away. The skyline swallowed her, and with her went every illusion the office had built about who she was. Downstairs, silence reigned. Phones stopped recording. Laughter had died so thoroughly it felt impossible it had ever existed. People just stood, staring at the windows, as if the world outside had rewritten the rules of the one inside. But fallout always comes fast. By that afternoon, Greg sat in HR, his face pale, his excuses useless. The viral photo of the one captioned "Rebel Warehouse Guard" had been traced to his account. By evening, his desk was empty, his career dismantled. Vanessa's whispered insult, "farm girl," surfaced online through a leaked recording. Her publisher cut ties. Her book deal collapsed in hours. The design team's tick, "one day as a soldier," flooded with comments. Disrespectful, cruel, shameful. Within days, sponsors pulled out. Lost her clothing brand partnership. Follower count plummeted. Tried to apologize, but her words drowned under the roar of battlefield footage of that spread like wildfire. The world didn't just notice, it demanded her story. Inside the office, the silence was suffocating. Nobody spoke her name, yet it hung in every room. Harold, the finance director, stood at his office door longer than usual, his limp heavier, his eyes fixed on the memory of the map she'd carried. He knew. He had known the whole time, and now the world knew too. Mike, the janitor, mopped the floors and Josh whispered frantically about their ruined reputations. He paused, leaning on his mop, his voice low, steady, cutting. "You didn't know who you were messing with." Flinched. "We were just joking." "Jokes like that," Mike said, "cost people their dignity." He went back to mopping. His words stayed long after he left. The office felt smaller without her, quieter. Every empty chair reminded them of the girl they had dismissed, mocked, written off. But Carter was not gone. Her name filled news articles, military forums, whispered conversations across the city. She was Lieutenant Carter, the one who walked silently through humiliation, who carried her truth without flaunting it, who never once sought their approval. And when the truth finally came, it wasn't loud, it wasn't vengeful. It was undeniable. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, It doesn't fight for recognition. Sometimes dignity just waits. And then it acts. Why didn't she ever tell them? That was the question echoing through every corner of the office, long after the Black Hawk's roar had faded. For days, her name was everywhere, on news tickers in late-night conversations, splashed across social feeds that couldn't get enough of her story. People scrolled through old footage, grainy clips of a 19-year-old, headset on, eyes fixed on something far beyond her years. But inside those clips, nobody saw what she carried. They didn't see the nights without sleep, the hours she sat with her back against cold concrete walls, listening to distant gunfire, telling herself not to close her eyes because if she did, she might never open them again. They didn't see the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain she never asked to climb. She had been 19, barely out of high school. One moment she was a daughter, a sister, a girl figuring out life's small puzzles. The next, she was holding the lives of grown men in her hands. Back then, she didn't have the luxury of silence. Orders had to be given. Lives depended on her voice cutting clean through panic. Move north, hold the line, extraction in 5. Every word cost her something. And when the mission was over, when the survivors staggered out alive and the helicopters carried them home, the silence returned. That's when it hurt most, when the adrenaline bled away and all that was left were the faces of the ones who didn't make it. That silence, she carried it still, into classrooms, into civilian jobs, into that glass tower where laughter had been sharper than bullets. It wasn't that she couldn't speak. It was that she had already spoken in the moments that mattered most. And now, she no longer felt the need to prove herself to anyone. But others didn't understand. At media, fallout spread like wildfire. The executives scrambled to control the narrative, issuing press releases about their support for veterans, though everyone in the building remembered how they had mocked her only days earlier. Vanessa's book deal was gone. Greg's name was mud. The design team's sponsorships had crumbled, but still, around the office coffee machines, whispers rose. Why was she even here? Was this some undercover assignment? Do you think she was watching us the whole time? The speculation made her into a myth, but myths are easy to twist. Some painted her as a hero, others as a threat. Harold, the finance director, knew better. He had seen the map in her bag. He recognized it not just for what it was, but for what it meant. He once limped through places where such maps decided whether you made it home. And when he saw Mark every point, he knew she hadn't been playing soldier. She'd been living it. But Harold kept his silence, because some truths don't belong to you. They belong to the ones who lived them, and had lived more than most could imagine. Some nights after the office emptied and city lights glittered like fall stars, she sat alone on her narrow bed in a small apartment uptown. The city roared outside her window, sirens, horns, voices, but inside was stillness. She would open the rusty tin from her backpack. Inside were tokens of a life she never spoke of, a patch torn at the edge, a photograph of her team, dust-streaked, smiling despite the chaos around them, a folded slip of paper with a single phrase scrawled in shaky handwriting, "You got us home." Her fingers lingered on that note. She could still hear his voice, the young medic who had pressed it into her palm after the extraction, his hands trembling, his eyes wet. She'd nodded then, too overwhelmed to speak. But he hadn't made it through the next mission. That note was all she had left. She kept it not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the weight, of the cost, of the reason she didn't need to defend herself when people mocked her jacket or her silence. Because dignity doesn't come from what they call you. It comes from what you carry when nobody else can. Back at the office, the janitor Mike kept mopping floors with his usual steady rhythm, but his eyes followed the ones who had laughed the loudest. He'd been a sailor once. He knew shame when he saw it, settling heavy on their shoulders. One evening, He paused near the Ware and Josh sat whispering, their voices low and desperate, their perfect facades cracked under the weight of public humiliation. Mike leaned on his mop, his voice gravelly. "You didn't know who you were dealing with." Looked up, her eyeliner smudged, her tone defensive. "We were just joking." Mike shook his head. "Jokes at someone else's expense. That's cowardice, not humor." The silence after his words was deeper than the hum of the fridge. He didn't need to say more. He just walked away, leaving them staring at their reflections in the window. Meanwhile, outside the building, the world began demanding more of Carter. News anchors speculated about her return. Defense analysts debated her future. Social feeds trended with her name, split between awe and doubt. But stayed silent. In her apartment, she packed her bag methodically, extra clothes, her notebook, the map, the tin. She didn't know when the next call would come, only that it would. The Black Hawk had not been the end. It had been the beginning of something resurfacing. And in the quiet, when the city noise softened for a brief moment before dawn, she let herself feel it. The exhaustion, the grief, the flicker of pride she buried under layers of silence. She thought of her teammates, the ones she had saved, the ones she had lost. She thought of the office laughter, the sting of mockery that had felt sharper than bullets, and she thought of the faces pressed to the windows as the helicopter lifted her away. They had mocked her, and then, in a single moment, they had seen her for what she really was. Not an intern, not an outsider, not someone to laugh at, but a woman who carried battles in her silence. And even though she never said it out loud, the truth was clear. She hadn't needed their approval. She never needed it. Because real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be seen. It simply endures. And when the time is right, it acts. Why do some people try so hard to disappear, only to be pulled back into the light? Had asked herself that question more times than she could count. After the Black Hawk lifted her away, after the headlines exploded, after her name became a signal in every news cycle, she wanted nothing more than silence, to fade back into the quiet, to be unseen again. But you can't return to anonymity once the world remembers who you are. The Department of Defense didn't leave her a choice. They didn't drag her back in chains. They didn't give her orders on paper. They simply showed up at her apartment with clipped words, sharp eyes, and the unspoken truth that her past was no longer her past. "Lieutenant Carter," one of them said, though she hadn't worn that rank in years, "your expertise is needed. Personnel protection, tactical oversight." She wanted to say no. She wanted to tell them she'd already given enough, that her hands still remembered the weight of those she couldn't save. But when she looked at the faces of the young recruits waiting for her answer, she saw herself, fresh, untested, uncertain, not knowing the storms they'd have to walk into. And she couldn't walk away, not when she knew what silence would cost them. So she nodded, quiet, reluctant, but resolute. The world spun faster after that. The media chased her. Old allies called, their voices heavy with respect, some with guilt for leaving her to vanish in the first place. Veterans reached out, men twice her age, telling her she had carried more weight than anyone should. But the office, the place where she'd been dismissed, mocked, belittled, remained frozen in their shame. Inside those glass walls, nobody said her name. Nobody joked anymore. The laughter that once cut her was gone, replaced with the uneasy silence of guilt. Harold, the finance director, moved slower, his limp more pronounced. He watched the others with a kind of grim detachment, as if silently weighing them. Sometimes when he passed the supply room where she had once counted pens, he paused, like a man at a memorial. Mike, the janitor, carried on with his mop, but when his eyes drifted to the interns, there was no humor in them, only quiet judgment. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't anger. It was simply the truth settling over them. They had laughed at someone carrying more than they could imagine. And that weight, now it belonged to them. but wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was on the move again, flying low over foreign ground, headset pressed against her ear. The rotors of the Black Hawk thudded above her, steady, familiar. The storm of war rose beneath her feet once more. Her team looked to her. Young faces, tense hands gripping rifles, eyes darting to her like she carried the map of their survival. And she did. "Carter," the pilot called through the headset, 2 clicks out. "No clear LZ, options." Her voice was calm, it had to be. "North Ridge, hold hover, we'll fast rope." No hesitation, no doubt. The chopper tilted, blades screaming. The team followed her orders without question. And in that moment, wasn't an intern anymore. She wasn't the quiet girl in the corner, mocked for her jacket. She was what she had always been, a soldier who carried silence like armor, who led without needing to be seen. But even in the middle of command, her mind flickered back, not to the battlefield but to that office. The sneers, the laughter, the way they tried to strip her of dignity without ever knowing what she had endured. And she wondered, why did it hurt almost as much as war? Why did their cruelty cut as deep as shrapnel? Because sometimes the battles that leave no scars on the skin carve the deepest wounds in the soul. She steadied her breath, ropes down, move. Boots hit dirt, dust rose, the mission began. Hours later, after extraction, after debriefs, after another set of lives had been pulled back from the brink, sat alone again. Silence pressed in. It always did after missions. She took out the rusty tin from her pack, opened it, and traced her finger over the folded note. "You got us home." She wondered if the men and women she led today would ever understand what it cost her, if they would remember her in the same way, or if they would carry their survival as a shadow, the way she carried hers. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, a link. She hesitated before opening it. It was footage from the office. One of the interns had secretly recorded her fixing the fire alarm with nothing but a pen. The caption read, "Guess she really was a soldier all along." The comments beneath it weren't mocking anymore. They were reverent, curious, some even apologetic. But didn't smile. She didn't feel vindicated. Because dignity doesn't need validation. She closed the video, shut off the phone, and leaned back against the wall. Outside, the night stretched endless. The war, the office, the laughter, the silence, it all blurred together. Different, same weight. And in the stillness, she knew one thing with certainty. No matter where she went, no matter how the world saw her, she would always carry both. The battlefield and the boardroom. The bullets and the laughter. The silence of loss and the roar of survival. Because a soldier never truly leaves the fight. And for Carter, the war had only just followed her home. What do people see when they look at a soldier? Uniforms, medals, headlines, strength. What they don't see are the nights. Carter lived in those nights. The city was loud, horns, laughter spilling from late-night bars, the low rumble of subway trains below the streets. But inside her apartment it was silent. Too silent. She sat on the edge of her bed, jacket draped over the chair, boots tucked by the door. Her backpack lay open at her feet, spilling out fragments of a life split in two. The photo of her team, the folded note, the worn map, pieces of memory that never let her rest. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Another news anchor, another request for interviews, another headline twisting her life into a story she hadn't written. America's quiet hero, the soldier who hid in plain sight, from boardroom to battlefield. They spoke like they owned her truth, like they had been there in the dust, the heat, the panic, but they hadn't. She closed her eyes, and the silence inside the apartment gave way to another silence. The silence of a desert night. She was 19 again. The mission blurred in her mind, though the pieces never left her. A convoy stranded, engines dead, sandstorm closing in, radios cut, ammunition low. And her. youngest commander in the unit, the one who had to make the call. Her hands had shaken then. She remembered looking at them, trembling against the map, wondering if anyone else could see how unsteady she was. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. Route Charlie, hold formation, medic left flank. Every syllable was like stone, laid down to build a path through chaos. And they had moved, they had followed, because soldiers don't need their leaders to be fearless, they need them to be steady. But not everyone made it out. She saw his face again, the medic who had slipped her the note, who had whispered, "You got us home." She had carried that scrap of paper ever since, but he hadn't lived to write another. And that was the wound nobody saw. The world called her a hero. She called herself a survivor. Because heroes save everyone, survivors just carry what's left. Her eyes opened. The city lights bled through the blinds. Her breath shook, but her face was still. She stood, zipped her backpack, and walked out into the noise of the city. The media's obsession had only grown. Billboards flashed her face, stills from grainy footage of her younger self. Talk shows dissected her silence, arguing about what it meant. Some said it was humility. Others claimed it was arrogance. The truth was simpler. Silence was survival. But silence didn't shield her from everything. One night, as she slipped into a quiet diner to eat in peace, she heard her name at the next table. Two men hunched over their phones, voices low but sharp. "Carter, that's her, the one who led 7 Alpha." "Yeah, but look, some say the mission wasn't clean. Some say she left people behind." The words slid under her skin like knives. She didn't look at them, didn't correct them. She just paid for her coffee, left a tip, and walked out. Because she knew the truth. And the truth was heavier than rumors. But when she lay down that night, the whispers followed her, left people behind. Her jaw tightened. She remembered every face, every loss, every impossible choice. And still, she remembered the one she had brought home. The world wanted her story in pieces they could digest, but her story wasn't made of clean lines or simple victories. It was made of fracture, of silence, of the weight she carried every time she walked into a room where nobody knew what she'd endured. And now the world knew. But they didn't understand. Back at media, the office still reeled. Their casual cruelty had become viral shame. Their faces trended on forums that replayed their laughter side by side with footage of under fire. The contrast was brutal. Stayed home, unable to face the cameras camped outside the building. Josh's inbox filled with death threats. And deleted their tick accounts, their laughter echoing forever in the clips others had saved. Harold, however, stayed. He worked quietly, shoulders heavier, gaze darker. He had seen enough in his life to know this was bigger than viral shame. He recognized the fracture in because he carried it too. Late one evening, as the office emptied, he paused by the window, leaning on his cane. He whispered to the empty room as if to her absence, "You never stop carrying them, do you?" His reflection didn't answer, but he knew. Meanwhile, silence became louder than any words. She declined interviews. She ignored headlines. She walked through the city like a shadow. But the military didn't let go. Missions kept coming. Quiet assignments, strategic advisories, times when her voice was needed, when her presence turned chaos into direction. Each time she returned with the same silence. She never bragged, never boasted. She carried the missions the same way she carried everything else, inward. But in the stillness of night, when her jacket hung heavy on the chair and the city roared outside her window, she wondered how much longer she could carry both lives. The soldier, the civilian. The woman mocked for her jacket, and the commander trusted with lives. Two worlds that never belonged together, and yet she walked in both. And maybe that was her curse. Or maybe that was her strength. Why is it that the world only listens once it's too late? Had lived in silence long before the Black Hawk came for her. But now that silence had become a weapon, the city didn't stop talking. Every street corner, every glowing screen, every voice in the crowd seemed to carry her name. Lieutenant Carter, 7 Alpha, youngest commander. Yet herself said nothing. She walked the streets in her faded jacket, head bowed, backpack heavy against her shoulder, while people whispered as she passed. Some whispered with awe, others with suspicion, a few with resentment, because nothing unsettles people more than realizing they misjudged someone beyond recognition. Back at media, the silence was different. It wasn't respect, it was shame. Greg was gone, fired within days. Vanessa's career crumbled online. The design team, once so loud, now walked the halls in silence, their eyes down, their laughter dead. Avoided mirrors. Josh stopped smiling. Deleted her social accounts, but the video of her rummaging through his backpack remained viral, reposted daily with captions like, "You never know who you're mocking." The building itself seemed quieter, as if its absence echoed louder than her presence ever had. But guilt doesn't heal by itself. Mike, the janitor, watched them all. His mop moved steady across the floor, his gaze harder than before. He didn't need to lecture them. He didn't need to shame them. He just carried his quiet like had carried hers. And in that silence, they felt the weight of what they'd done. Harold, the finance director, tried once to speak. At a late meeting, when the air was stale and the team restless, he set down his pen and said, "You'll never understand what she carried." The room froze. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain. He just looked at them, his eyes sharp with memories of his own past, and left them with that truth. But wasn't in those rooms anymore. She was far from them, pulled back into the machinery of missions she hadn't asked to return to. She stood in briefing rooms again, older faces surrounding her, younger ones looking to her for guidance. The hum of screens, the low rustle of maps, the clipped voices of commanders, it was all too familiar. And yet, she wasn't the same girl she had been at 19. Her silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of someone who knew the cost of every decision. "Carter," one general said, his tone half respect, half command, "your presence alone shifts the room. The recruits follow you without question. Why not step forward officially, speak, lead?" Shook her head. Leadership isn't about presence, it's about trust, and trust isn't built in front of cameras. The general frowned but didn't push, because he knew, if Carter had one unshakable truth, it was that she would never bend for recognition. Still, the world demanded more. Journalists camped outside her building. Reporters shouted questions she ignored. Veterans wrote letters begging her to speak for them. Families of soldiers lost overseas asked her to tell their children's stories. The pressure mounted like a storm. But inside her apartment remained the same. She unzipped her backpack, laid out her artifacts, touched the note, "You got us home," and let the silence hold her together. Because speaking would mean reliving it all, and she wasn't sure she could survive that again. But silence carries its own price. At media, silence didn't heal the guilt, it fed it. Tried to rebuild her reputation, posting apologies online, saying she never meant harm. But her words rang hollow against the footage of her laughing in his face. The internet tore her apart, labeling her the emblem of cruelty. Josh drank more. He sat at his desk, hands shaking, scrolling endlessly through old clips of In Combat. Each video reminded him of the moment he'd called her boot camp field trip. The shame hollowed him. Wrote long messages she never sent, apologies drafted and deleted a dozen times. She told herself she'd find one day, tell her face to face. But deep down, she knew didn't need her apology, didn't need anything from her. And that was the truth of all. Because when someone doesn't need your forgiveness, your guilt becomes your prison. Harold knew this. He saw it in their faces. He carried his own ghosts, men who hadn't made it home, decisions that still kept him awake decades later. But Harold also knew something else. Guilt can either break you or teach you. And the office, it hadn't decided yet. Meanwhile, lived in both worlds. She carried coffee quietly in one hand and evacuation plans in the other. She walked city streets unseen, then sat in helicopters where every eye fixed on her. Two lives, two selves, and the crack between them widened each day. One night she sat in her apartment with the TV flickering muted images of her face across the screen. She didn't watch. She stared at the map on her desk instead, the one marked with every point. Her fingers traced the lines, remembering dust, remembering fire. The city outside roared with life. The world inside her stayed still. And she asked herself, not for the first time, how long can silence hold? Because silence may shield, but silence also breaks. And soon she knew she would have to choose. Stay hidden in the quiet, or step forward into the storm. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because sometimes the silence isn't yours to keep anymore. What does it mean to walk away without saying a word? For Carter, silence had always been her shield, her language, her survival. But silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. After the Black Hawk lifted her from the rooftop, the office never returned to normal. How could it? Every corner carried memory. Every desk whispered with guilt. The ghost of their laughter clung to the walls like smoke. They had mocked her jacket. They had laughed at her silence. They had dismissed her as nothing more than a misfit. And then they saw her truth. Greg's career ended in disgrace. Vanessa's book deal collapsed under the weight of her words. The design team dissolved into anonymity, their laughter immortalized not as humor but as cruelty. Josh, each became reminders of how quickly a careless laugh can rot into shame. But never came back for revenge. She didn't return to the office. She didn't send messages, didn't post online, didn't correct their narratives. She simply disappeared again, into missions, into silence, into the places where survival mattered more than recognition. And in her absence, she became something greater than their apologies. She became a mirror. Every time they thought of her, every time the footage replayed, every time her name surfaced in conversation, they saw themselves reflected back. Their words, their laughter, their cruelty. She never needed to punish them. Their own memories did the work. Meanwhile, the world outside tried to claim her. News anchors branded her a hero. Politicians sought to parade her as proof of resilience. Strangers online begged her to speak, to inspire, to lead. But didn't speak, because she knew something they didn't. True strength doesn't come from microphones or applause. It comes from endurance, from carrying the weight no one else will touch, from surviving without demanding the world recognize your survival. Late one night in her apartment, she opened the rusty tin again. She unfolded the paper. "You got us home." Her eyes lingered on the words. They weren't written for the world. They weren't headlines. They weren't applause. They were the raw gratitude of someone who had lived because of her choices. That was enough. It always had been. Back at media, the silence had hardened into something else, reflection. Mike, the janitor, moved through the building with the same steady rhythm, but he carried himself differently now, like a quiet sentinel reminding them that dignity often hides in plain sight. Harold, the finance director, limped through the halls with a kind of reverence, remembering his own ghosts, knowing had joined that unspoken fraternity of the broken yet enduring. And the others, they tried to move on, but you can't scrub shame off like a stain. They wore it every day. It lingered in the way they avoided eye contact, the way their laughter never rose above a whisper, the way their work felt smaller after her truth had filled the building. Carter's name became a legend beyond them. But inside those walls, she was something else. She was the weight of their own reflection. The city eventually shifted its gaze. The headlines dimmed. The cameras moved on, but kept moving too: missions, travel, nights in silence, mornings in shadow. She carried it all without demand. And in time, she realized the truth of all. The office didn't break her. It revealed her. It showed the world what she had always been: a soldier who didn't need applause, a leader who didn't need recognition, a woman whose silence carried more power than their noise ever could. And in that revelation lay the moral they could never erase. Because dignity doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't argue for its place. It doesn't scream against cruelty. Dignity waits. Dignity endures. And when the time comes, dignity simply acts. Carter never returned to that glass tower. She didn't need to. Her presence lingered without her. Her story lived on in whispers, in headlines, in the quiet guilt of those who had once mocked her. And somewhere on another rooftop, with the thrum of rotors above and the night sky stretching wide, she stood again in silence. Her jacket still faded. Her backpack still frayed. Her eyes still steady. The world didn't need her words to know who she was. Sometimes the greatest stories aren't told in speeches or books. Sometimes they're carried in silence. And Carter's silence was louder than all of them.